Hi, I'm Chris,
And I'm Eli.
and we are the Landlord Gurus. We've been managing our own rental property for decades now, and we've created this show to share our experiences, tips, and best practices we've refined over the years. Thanks for joining us, whether you found us on YouTube or our podcast or at landlordgurus.com. Before we get started, just a reminder to like, share, and subscribe so you'll get notified when we put out new content. All right, hello again. This is Landlord Gurus. I'm Chris. We've got Eli, and today we've got a special guest, Nate Smoyer. Nate is a longtime rental property owner. He has been a DIY landlord for quite a while. He's got several properties, manages them remotely. I know he's got stuff here in Washington, but he lives in, and Nate, remind me where you are again?
I'm in South Dakota.
South Dakota, right. So it's very remotely. He's dealing with it and has had success with that. Nate's been a long-time player in the prop tech world. We'll get into kind of what prop tech is a little bit later, but that's how we kind of got to know Nate several years ago, working with one of our partner companies. And he's just stayed involved with that for a while, had his own podcast, and has kind of been one of the leaders in the forefront for, all the prop tech stuff that's been going on in the last several years, keeping up with it a lot better than we have, which is why we're talking to him here. And now Nate's heading up marketing at Lula, which is one of the first tech-enabled platforms that can help landlords take on their rental property maintenance, aimed at small, mid-sized property managers, independent landlords, and even larger, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to tell us a little bit about, fill in the gaps there, Nate, about your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, well, Chris did a great job there. I appreciate it. And thanks, guys, for having me on the show. As you mentioned, been a DIY landlord since 2015. I've got a mixed-use property in Washington State, 5 cabins for short-term rentals in Ohio. And then just to keep things spicy, I've got a self-storage facility in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So I'm all about just you can find ways of handling things remote. I've got more help on the vacation stuff because I'm more of a partner in that business than a sole owner. But the storage I run myself, and you have to find providers on hand, on site and that sort of thing. And then, same with Washington. So it's a fun journey doing all that. As you mentioned, I've been in prop tech really exclusively since 2018 as an agency owner, helping early stage prop tech companies scale growth through paid media, building and leading the marketing program for Avail. From my start with the company to the time we were acquired by Realtor.com was only 18 months. And since then, I've had engagements with companies like Stessa. I've worked with Azebo. I was the head of marketing with Obi, which is insurance for investors in the space, as well as a handful of other advisories along the way. And now with Lula, one company that this has been about a 2-year journey of me getting to know the company, getting to know the co-founders and some of the other people here. This has been one of the most exciting opportunities that I've had the chance to participate in. The amount of improvement that is potentially, here for property managers as well as owners in solving for maintenance challenges is pretty tremendous. I've seen it firsthand. Every single platform, whether for mom pop owners and investors to third-party managers, maintenance is on the roadmap. Everyone wants to try and build a solution to solve for it. The reality is there really are that many intricacies and nuances to this problem that everyone faces. And
For sure.
That's why it's so exciting to be a part of this. People may not on the outside think toilets and, radiators and HVAC systems is exciting. But when I hear things that are mundane and day-to-day and usual, but there's a never-ending demand of it needs help, it needs some sort of solution, that's what gets me excited about this.
It is exciting. We've talked about some of these pain points that landlords have to deal with, and maintenance is almost always at the top of the list, right? Like you said, those toilets and everything that happens in the middle of the night, or they're often surprises. And we've talked about a lot of the companies that you've been involved in. You named off that list, and I was just thinking, as you went, wow, we've worked with you on that and that and that and that. But yeah, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people are probably already using technology for their rent collection and for advertising on Zillow, obviously. So, but I think, that maintenance to me seems like that's like the hardest part of the last bit for someone like me who wants to try and manage, as I'm in the process of taking on another property for some family members. And that's kind of like the biggest puzzle that we are kind of trying to figure out before we, actually start taking it on is how do we deal with the maintenance? Because they had a certain system in place when they had property manager there, and they had full-time staff that could deal with multiple different buildings all in the same location. But if we're doing it ourselves, it's like, how are we going to deal with that? And so I think, the timing of talking to you again now with Lula, I think is sort of perfect in my mind, as far as what I'm dealing with. But I think for a lot of landlords out there as well, it's that missing piece.
Yeah, I think of it like you kind of talk about the biggest problems. I think of it a few different ways. Is one, you have to market your property correctly to even attract the right renters. And generally your neighborhood, generally who's probably going to see the highest value out of the property and who's probably going to value it in the highest manner. I think that's actually an important key. Who's going to value the renter that moves in? The screening is absolutely the most critical step following the marketing. And once the screening is followed outside of your normal regulations and rules for your local market and your state markets, and we've talked about this, especially if you're in Washington, make sure you know all those regulations, like it's such as your inspection and getting that signed around within 14 days of move-in. The next bit is the maintenance. And the maintenance is so key because it maintains the expectations that you set up front.
That's a good point.
And it can prevent unnecessary turnovers. It can prevent unnecessary hardships with the relationship, degrading over time. It can prevent, a tenant feeling lackluster about the place and just not even telling you about things because why bother? It doesn't get fixed. So yeah, happy to jump in where you want to, or you guys want to start, because I think this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. When we chatted about this discussion, we kind of talked about me, have a little bit of a devil's advocate in me. I have a firmly held belief that this is one of the biggest pain points in property management, handling maintenance, making sure that you are able to take care of your property, keep people happy, and to do it in a cost-effective way. And to me, as somebody who's self-managed for a really long time now and also has a background in construction, I believe that one of my advantages is that I can kind of intuit what's going on sometimes. And I've talked about it as kind of a triage process. You've got a request coming in, hey, such and such is broken. And so how you make meaning out of that and choose which next step to take out of that, to me, feels like it can make the difference between getting that repair done really cost effectively, sometimes free, or spending a lot of money on it if the wrong repair person goes out that doesn't know that it's a Maytag washer and isn't equipped to even repair the Maytag, that type of thing. So, a question that I would have for you if I was to, become one of your clients with Lula is, how do you guys navigate that stuff to make sure that you're sending the right people, you're assessing what needs to be done, in kind of a cost-effective way? Nothing's perfect.
Yeah. So we'll take a little bit of a step back. So for third-party property managers working with Lula, it can be as simple as activating an integration within Folio, Rent Manager, Property Meld. For the mom and pop audience, right now we work with Turbo Tenant, and so you can activate that within Turbo Tenant. And there is a fee to activate that. So right out the gate, I know we're hitting friction because as a mom and pop owner, you're not paying anything to have to call anyone. So I totally understand that, but I want to get that up front. And then I'm going back into this question of triage. How does that work out for you? So I'm going to read you. This was in our channel. We have a positive feedback Slack channel. Anytime someone's doing something good, customer feedback, client feedback, that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
And this was an example. When a work order comes in, either from the renter or the property manager, it comes into the Lula management system. And so we're going to start looking at, okay, hey, what's being requested? What's broken here? Now, right out the gate, every one of our representatives, you're asking about the triage, they're equipped with our AI Copilot. Our AI Copilot has been trained on 8 years of solving property maintenance issues. So unlike a lot of others that might say like they have the AI, and that's sure, you can wrap things around ChatGPT and say that it's going to be suddenly smart. We have actual, real conversational history and data in solving property maintenance issues, the questions known to ask, along with data and AI engineers in constantly tuning this. So our team is already ready to triage. And so this was an issue where property manager sent us a work order for the garbage disposal not working. Have you tried pressing the reset button? So that was the message back to the renter from our triage team. and it flows from Lula through ever the integration. And we just, our person goes down to describe the button, where it's located, and then even sends a link to a YouTube video on how to locate that button. Then there was 2 outbound calls made to the tenant to, again, try and establish that connection. And then a few hours later, assuming when the tenant got off work, says, yes, it's working now. Thank you.
Yeah,
So no
that's
contractor.
Great. Yeah.
Landlord didn't have to be bothered by it. The work order was sent in, but outside of that, that was it. And that's the kind of thing that we can do for a very long list of issues that pop up that we have gone over and over and over. And I want to say I don't know that I can say the exact number, but we are thousands upon thousands of work orders weekly. And that amount of volume and training, that means every single person in our triage team is equipped with a super powerful AI co-pilot on the right questions to ask, suggestions, recommendations. And so it really creates an unfair advantage in comparison to a lot of other triage or phone centers. And it's not a pay per call. It's not a pay per issue kind of thing. Within the Turbo tenant, it's really a matter of, because it's such a smaller clientele person, per customer through Turbo tenant. Whereas when it's a property manager, it's a little bit different. And there's no additional subscription or things like that, through that.
And if it takes one message back and forth to solve it, or if it takes 5 or it's all the same, right?
Yeah, it'll more than pay for itself. And now you could say, well, Nate, I can take the calls for free. I can take all those emails for free. And you're absolutely and totally right about that. This is where I see the devil's advocate side. At some point, there's a trade-off between time and money. And it's a very small ask relative if you break it down on a month-to-month basis. That's how I always do. I amortize things out on a year or 2-year basis and look at the cost. And if that saves me a few calls, it's done.
Well, and here's the thing: if you're a landlord that's like me, that's maybe got a little bit of experience of some of these maintenance issues, and like the garbage disposal, sure, I can tell them, go find the reset button. But there's other stuff where I get the call, and so then I got to go look up on YouTube, or I got to go ask ChatGPT how to call Eli, right? So if, that in and of itself takes some time and back and forth. Whereas it sounds like you guys are armed with all that. You've had the experience.
It's all we do.
Yeah, exactly. So you're able to answer that, ideally of a first or second go around, right, with the tenant and get it taken care of. Whereas, I'm like, oh, well, check this. Nope, that didn't work. Check this. And, I'm looking on YouTube and trying to figure it out on my own.
And one of the things that, you get good, fast, and cheap, but you can't get all three. Generally is the rule of thumb, right?
True.
And so one of the things we also look at, though, is speed. Speed's critical, not just in responding to renters, but all around the, across the board here. And the challenges with vendors is actually being able to get vendors out quickly itself. Because of the volume we do, and because of one other thing, we pay our vendors within 2 days.
Yeah.
So our vendors know when they work with Lula, they're going to get paid. And then we bill back the property manager, or in this case with Turbo Tenant, we bill back Turbo Tenant. And so then the owner just pays whichever one, they're working through. If they're working through Turbo Tenant, they just pay Turbo Tenant. And if they're working through a property manager, then they pay the property manager. But it solves that component of making sure that the vendor is taken care of. They want to work with that. They want to take on that work. Because that's one of the other challenges right now with maintenance is, can you get someone to show up? That's really
that was
hard.
one of the notes, I had was kind of this, what I believe is really a myth of the 3 bids. If we're talking about a whole new HVAC system or a remodel, then a couple of bids is the way to go. But when you got to have a toilet cleared, or something's leaking right now, there's no time for that. You need somebody. And, personally, either I don't do very much hands-on anymore, personally. I really try not to, but I do have people that I trust, that I've developed, that I can kind of call on, which is what you guys are developing on a much larger scale. And, the one asset that I feel like, I rely on most is a really competent and available handy person who I don't pay rock bottom prices to, but will help me when I call him. So it's very valuable to have these relationships.
So Nate, how do you guys vet you must have, people who can do the whole gamut, which must be just a ton of people. I don't even know how many, hundreds, thousands of people across the country that can do all the various tasks that might be called upon. How do you guys How do you find them? How do you vet them? I mean, that's a big thing too. Of I want to make sure that someone who's going to other people's homes,
Yeah.
that they are responsible, clean up after themselves, treat people right, that kind of thing. Like, how do you do all of that? That must be an enormous task.
It is. You're not wrong. There's some things that AI solves for entirely right now, and there's some things that still require a people first approach. We definitely take a fair amount of a people first approach when it comes to our pros, as we refer to them in our network. We have over 7,000 pros in our network across the country, and close to 50 some markets. We start off with a very simple application, collecting a lot of the basic information. That pro then is asked to take a competency test based on their focus or their area of focus. And that competency test includes very specific questions on like how you would diagnose, how would you solve for, and then also what would you charge for. And that we compare against the other tens of thousands of applications we've had. And so then we can actually see where do they fall within all these averages. Then we also have very current projects. I mean, that's automatically graded against those to see where is this all falling together. One, if they're within the bounds where this is reasonable, this makes sense, this is where we'd want people to fall into, great. We know we're a good fit, good solid fit here, and it's based on our data from our applications. We then go through a business verification, so we look for licenses, insurance, and then on the individual level, any individual who's going to be within the property is then gone through background check. Our pros use the Lula Pro app, so we know when they're on site and they leave. So we have verification of the time spent on site. We look to gather before and after photos, so we have proof of work, and we're able to be transparent back to owners on the proof of work. And then post jobs, we conduct an MPS, not just on the pro, but also on Lula. We collect that MPS on the pro. So we want to know, how is the experience from the renter working with the pro? And for those that do, work through a property manager, this is actually where we help with some reputational management. When there's a positive experience, we go ahead and refer that person to leave a public review on that property manager's Google page. So we're making sure to really optimize in that moment, the feeling and the experience. And then you can also just go through and read all the public reviews for Lula on Google to see what that looks like. But all that's connected. I know you asked just on the front end, but all that's connected because that's how we maintain the network. And so long as the jobs are well done, we get graded based on the tenant experience and the NPS on that pro, the experience working with those pros and the property managers, it's all connected. And then, I don't know how much the listeners might be familiar with how Uber works with drivers, but the way Uber works, it generally says like, hey, if you pick up someone to take to the airport and you like going to the airport, we're going to give you more airport rides, right? Because you keep accepting airport rides, we're going to give you more of those. And you keep getting 5 stars, we're going to keep giving you more of those. We have our own internal algorithms as to how we also give first dibs to opportunities to pros in our network based on the type of jobs they accept and the type of jobs they excel at. So we're really optimizing the experience across the board for everyone. And this is where that marrying of services and tech really comes together to make sure that, hey, this is the right pro for the right job.
You're doing some things that are really difficult for an independent property manager to do, whereas
Exactly.
I can do it on a fairly small scale by knowing a person. I can have a pretty good sense of like, is this a person that I'm comfortable sending into an apartment, putting into direct contact with my tenants or not, but I'm not doing it on a methodology as you're able to. And it would be very difficult to. So, and another thing, in a past conversation, I think you brought up the fact that you guys have some set pricing services as well. Isn't that right? Are there certain things that they're flat prices and here's what it costs?
We do. Yeah, we do. So because of our buying power, we've negotiated with suppliers directly fixed prices on larger equipment. So think your water heaters, your total HVAC system, which by the way, if people aren't familiar, and, I'm not familiar to the T of describing all the rules, but you should be familiar knowing that HVAC systems, there are some new rules around refrigerants. You're going to want to know that and see. That's a CapEx you should start planning for. But for those, for any other larger jobs, we have flat rate pricing. And really what we've done, and the reason for this was to get rid of the unknown. Sometimes you have things and you'll get a quote like, well, we think it'll be somewhere between 2 and 6 hours. And like, well, if the hourly rate's $100 an hour and it might take 1 or 2 people, like the range of the quote here is just all over the place. We know what those jobs should cost. We know the estimated time, we know the materials. And so we put that price out front. The pro is on board with that. We're on board with it. And then so we think that makes a better experience for everyone across the board. It's a lot more transparency than you would typically get. And we only get that capability because of our buying power directly with suppliers.
Okay. How do you guys handle? Can you just kind of walk us through the logistics of, so if somebody does have a call and a maintenance person does have to come out to the property, like how is that handled? Are they set up in advance, or do they need to be set up in advance with key codes or, access, things like that? Or does the landlord or property manager kind of need to be there to let them in? How's that all work?
That's a great question. Access is one of the leading challenges in any type of services business. We generally stick with single family and like garden style type multifamily. And access is a big key component to that. For property managers and for owners who have a condo unit, for instance, there's just additional layers to this, because even if you manage your own condo, the building access is different. You have to go to this office and get a permission slip. And, for my time living in Chicago, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. It's just, and we lived in a decent condo building, but it was just, everything was a nightmare and a half. There was nowhere to park. I couldn't actually get you a parking spot to begin with. So you had to park down the street if you weren't a building select vendor and that sort of thing. Now, the way we've handled this, however, is when the request comes in and the job has been accepted by one of our pros, now through the Lula app, so the pro uses the Lula app, now they can communicate to the renter. So they're not getting the renter's information directly. They don't have their personal cell phones exactly. They could text through the app. So again, kind of like that Uber experience where like the driver doesn't have the rider's, actual phone number, but they can communicate directly with them. Right. But we've already established a schedule for when it works for the pro to go. So that was part of the process in accepting the job and knowing when is possible. And that's all on our coordination team. That's where all that work is handled. So we're not putting it on the effort on the pro to figure out when is a good time. We're not putting on the effort back on the owner or the property manager when it's a good time. It's really, at the end of the day, it's down to the renter. Hey, when can that AC repairman come out? Does Friday at noon work, or would you prefer, Saturday in the afternoon? You tell us, and great. Now that we've got that selected, we give it to the pro. Here are the available windows. So they look at the job, they look at the price, and they look at the time, say, yep, I'm in, boom. And now they're good to go. As far as access, that's, again, it goes back to renter needs to be on site typically to let them in and that sort of thing. So with single family, it's much easier that way. Generally, unless it's a make ready, which we do offer make ready services, and actually one of our fastest expanding business lines of business, there's going to be someone there to let you in. And like most repairs, it would not be out of the ordinary to have the renter's home to be able to let them in and show them what's going on.
Okay. Would it work to, if I did set up the building with a key code on the front entry and, if it's a laundry room repair or something like that, okay, perfect.
Yeah, we absolutely can work with that. It's just, when it gets to larger multifamily, that's just one of the biggest headaches for sure.
What would you say the best fit is between Lula and either type of landlord? Or a lot of our listeners, or at least our target, are small scale. A lot are new landlords, maybe renting out their first home after they've moved or they've inherited something, that type of thing. Where's the best fit that you're finding between your company and landlords?
Yeah. Now, so I might be a little rusty on some of these numbers here, but depending on how you measure how many individual or independent owners there are in the country, somewhere between 12 and 14 million. And of them, they own and operate approximately 24 to 26 million rental properties. But when you look at the bulk majority of real estate investors across the country, they have one unit. And then the next largest segment is two. And at the very tail end of that's where you find the people with lots of units. So when it comes to the audience of landlord gurus, those that are using TurboTenant are great candidates. Everyone else, you'll have to wait till we bring it to a tool near you. But go ahead and message everyone, message Basely, message Avail, ask them, hey, how do we get Lula integrated? Go ahead and do that. But, for now, it would only be for TurboTenant users. We're able to do that because we have, they have a great team, really powerful technology, and really smart people behind the scenes over there. And we've been able to build out that integration and work with them and fine tuning that. For those that work with property managers, generally 200 doors and up is a really great fit for us. And it's not that we can't work with a smaller property manager. We do, and we have, but it just, again, it comes back to, there's just super ideal scenarios
Economies of
and
scale work.
situations. And so that 200 plus.
To
Totally.
make sense to do the integration, get everybody connect, figure out the systems.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Look, there's fixed costs no matter what per customer. And so, in order to really operate a strong business, you have to make sure that your fixed costs are more than covered. And so that's just one of those challenges, for us is from a business perspective when we make those decisions.
Yeah, it strikes me that for people who don't have the time or some knowledge, at least, I don't think you have to be an expert at building maintenance or anything like that, but if you are busy enough that it's difficult to pull away to take care of things in a really timely fashion, and I think you really, key into the tenant satisfaction element of this, where responsiveness is incredibly important. I actually advertise as, all my ads say small family operated building, because I think people care, about the sense that somebody's going to be there when they need something. And not having any response is one of the main things I hear from my tenants that they've been unhappy about in the past. So even if you just have one unit or two, if you're not able to be responsiveness, or if you don't have a bit of know-how or resources, to dispatch, then that feels like, a good opportunity to look at a company like Lula. Well, there isn't Lula, you guys are out in front. There really isn't anybody playing in your space to speak of. So good on you for getting there. But, it's worth looking around and saying, do I have the capability to take care of this in an effective fashion? And if not, get some help.
Yeah, I mean, this is a decision tree for, I think, every investor. Where do I have time and the expertise to handle something, and where would I rather reallocate that time or find someone who has expertise? I don't do plumbing of any sorts in any regards. I don't care how easy it is. Here. I just don't do it because I always mess it up. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's going to take so many less hours. It's going to be done so much better, and I'm going to have a lot more confidence in it. I can change an outlet. I can change light fixtures, but if any electrical issue comes up, I don't know. There's not even, I don't hesitate. I can paint, I can do landscaping, I can pick things up and put things down, right? And that's where I draw the line of knowing where my skill sets are and going out and getting someone else. And this goes into everything else. For my accounting, I get an accountant. It might not have the most complicated, but I know that it's going to be done correctly. And so, I think that when it comes to like keeping things in order and keeping things together, especially when it comes to maintenance, if that's an issue where you don't have the time or you really would like to get that off your plate, this is something that you should really strongly consider.
And I think it requires an honest look at what your capabilities are. I mean, I think that we all sort of overestimate what we can do and say, well, I can take care of that. But yeah, like you're right.
My recommendation is if you've ever painted over an outlet, then you need to go ahead and get someone else in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. It looks like we've lost Eli.
We've lost Eli.
But
we offended him. He's gone.
No, I think he's off to repair a toilet, maybe. I don't know. But I think we're at about the end of our time here for today anyways. I'd like to ask one last question. And this sort of touches on what we've just been talking about. But what, I guess, you say you don't do plumbing. Is there something, though, that for the DIY landlord that's out there, what should they really think about and think long and hard about not doing it themselves just because it's either too dangerous or the risk of messing something up is way too high? And maybe that just comes down to personal preference, but is there something that you think, hey, I really think from our experience, don't do this?
I really think it's come down to your own expertise. Look, if you went to law school, then you know how to write a lease. If you didn't, you should not write your own lease.
Yeah.
You probably don't have the same capabilities as TransUnion, so you need to use TransUnion when you're running your tenant screening. You probably can't build your own signature software. So use an electronic signature software because you know that it will hold up in court and it's a legal binding document. Doing inspections, you can do the inspection or you can have the renters do the inspection. I use RentCheck, by the way. For those that don't know about RentCheck, use RentCheck for your inspections. There's so many things you can do. but is it going to be complete? Is it going to meet, any rules and compliance regulations? And then is it really going to make sense? Like if you don't know how to solder, should you be changing the water heater? Well, what is the upside of the changing the water heater yourself? $500 in maintenance. Okay, you might say $500 in maintenance. The downside, you might do it wrong and still end up paying $500 in maintenance in addition to having a flooded basement or
Exactly.
utility room. So, at the end of the day is like, just like insurance, you underwrite your risk for insurance. If you own the property outright and you haven't had a claim in 20 years, maybe you self-insure, follow your heart. Otherwise, you're probably going to get insurance. So, I just look at everything the exact same way. Do you have the expertise? Do you have the time? If you're being honest with yourself, that should make it really simple in determining which direction you go. And of course, mitigate your costs. Don't just buy every tool off the shelf. And I totally understand every time you have to introduce a new cost, it's infinitely greater than, doing it for free. But at the same time, though, what is your time worth? What is it worth getting it right the first time? I think those are all the questions that we're asking ourselves constantly, both maintenance, but also other things, when it comes to owning and managing your own properties.
Exactly. And if it helps you sleep at night, both literally and figuratively in this case, I'd say let's do it. So, okay. Well, Eli's back. Do you have any last questions? We're about to
we
wrap
thought
up.
you went off to repair a toilet.
Yeah. I just couldn't wait to get back to doing that plumbing. I swore I was never going to do again. Now, there was one day in particular, a fateful day, where I decided I would do some soldering on my own. And I'd done it before, but it didn't go well. And fortunately, I didn't do any real damage, but it was difficult enough that I hung up my plumbing hat that day. And my only other comment, and sorry I ducked out there, is that there's also a point in time, for a lot of these decisions, I think. For me, when I started on this journey, I had zero money and a lot of time and a bit of knowledge and capabilities. So I leveraged that. And over time, as I built things up and I have a little bit more room and a little bit more money and a little bit less time, that things have shifted. And I'm fortunate now to, be able to make smarter choices, where I can outsource some things or pay for a tool, whether it be physical or virtual, so there's sometimes kind of a timeline, for how these things happen with independent landlords, especially when you're really trying to build something for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, great. So, I think we'll wrap it up here. Nate, thanks again so much for your time and for sharing your experience and Lula's experience with us. Remind us again, we can find you. And we'll put the links and everything down in the show description and the notes and everything. But Lula.com?
Lula.life for
life.
Lula. Yeah.
Life.
And you can find me anywhere, usually on either X or LinkedIn, just Nate Smoyer. Pretty easy to find. Appreciate you guys and the opportunity to come on here. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. Fun to chat.
And so a reminder, everyone, the listeners out there, remember to like, share, subscribe, all the stuff. If you got any other questions, put them down in the comments below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks a lot.